Something I wrestle with is how to make the case for why I feel like theater is necessary. And I recently read a book called Finding Your Third Space: Building Happier Communities and Making Great Friends Along the Way by Richard Kyte. Richard Kyte is the director of the D.B. Reinhardt Institute for Ethics and Leadership, an endowed professor of ethics at Viterboro University in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where he teaches courses on ethical issues in business, healthcare, law, politics, and the environment. He has published and lectured widely on justice, forgiveness, virtue, and the meaning of life. I absolutely loved Rick's book, and I loved this conversation mostly because in his book, he addressed many of the questions I feel like I'm wrestling with in theater and what I'm trying to solve with theater. And I think arguing that theater could be a third space and might not be yet is an incredibly exciting proposal. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. All right, Rick, thanks for doing this and thanks for joining me.
You bet.
So I have to tell you, I loved your book, Third Place's book. I guess just to share a little bit about where I'm coming from, and then I'm
Mhm.
excited to ask you some questions. But I feel as if, I've been doing theater for a long time. I run a theater company, and intuitively, and I've also read different things, but intuitively, I've been sort of scratching at a lot that I felt like your book crystallized. And
Mhm.
I felt sometimes like I've had this grandiose sort of notion. I'm like, this is more important this is more important than most people think, maybe less important than I feel it is. And when I read your book, it framed it in such, I just found your book a sort of a moral offering, and it framed third spaces in a way that felt necessary, without being, I don't know, overly exaggerated or grandiose, and got at what I feel like is a crux of a spiritual crisis that we're facing and that I believe we're facing, and I struggle to articulate. But I often feel. So first, I guess I just wanted to thank you for your book. Um,
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate you affirmed like two of the things that I'm trying to do in my writing in general, in that book particular. One is just encouragement. I find that there's all kinds of people doing really good things, and people that are doing that work need to be encouraged right now because it's a discouraging time to live. And the second time is a shared vocabulary for what a lot of us are engaged in together, but we're talking about it in different terms. And so then it feels like you're all alone trying to do something, and then you realize, oh no, actually I'm not. There's a whole bunch of us trying to address the same problem, but in different ways, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I felt, I mean, so we started in my theater company, we started a book club and a film club, and I struggle to articulate to people why I think they are so important, because sometimes our book club is growing, but our film club had like two people. And so anyway, reading your book, there was literally a moment where you mentioned like book clubs. I was like, hey, look at
Yes,
that.
right there. Yeah.
Maybe to
Yeah.
begin, just for people listening, maybe if you're open to just sharing, kind of what you share at the beginning of the book, but how you arrived at the notion of third space and writing the book.
Yeah, so it had a really long genesis because it was many years ago that I had a conversation with a friend, Bo Weston, who teaches at Center College, and where he just happened to mention that the place where we were meeting was a third place, and I'd never heard of the term. So he told me, well, it comes from Ray Oldenburg, and it's, first place is home, second place is work, third place is where we go to socialize. And so I looked into Oldenburg's work, and it fit very well with a course that I was teaching called Building Community. And I was in the course of, I was kind of developing this course, and I was looking for different materials. And on a whim, I asked my students to give a presentation on their third place. And they loved the assignment because people really like to share where they go and the places in the community that really give them life. And yet there were a few students in the class that realized for the first time that they didn't have a third place and they were missing
Yeah,
something that they didn't know they were missing, right?
yeah,
And it gave them a way of naming something that they were missing. Um, And then so that was probably that assignment was going on for probably 12 to 15 years, something like that. And and then I wrote a couple different columns. I write a regular column for Lee newspapers in which I talked about third places, and a publisher happened to read it, and this was in 2020. And during the pandemic, everybody was trying to name where are we missing this lack of social connection and the loneliness, like trying to find a vocabulary. And so that column really struck a chord. I got a lot of response, and a publisher reached out and said, "What could you develop this into a book?"
Mm,
And I thought, yeah, it's probably time to do that because Oldenburg's books were 1989, and then I think it was the mid 90s. He wrote two different books, and he's passed away since
mm.
then. And there weren't really many other treatments of that concept that I thought were really accessible and address some of the changes that have taken place in our society since
Yeah.
Oldenburg's time. So
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah. And maybe just to share, about sort of anyone listening, because I think now third places are getting into sort of the common vocabulary, but sometimes it's still not. Maybe we can just share a little bit about what they are. And as an example, I loved the example in your book of the two bars. Like
Mhm.
the you because I think when on the surface, if you're like, okay, well, the third place is not work or home, you might think of sort of the second bar that you mentioned of like just going with friends, and it's still alive, but it's not
Yeah.
maybe generating a larger sense of community beyond the people that you brought with you. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so in the book I tell a story about I visited during the summer as I was working on the book. I My wife and I were going around the state, and we're looking we were just stopping in different breweries because breweries have become really popular third place in many cities, but also in rural areas. They kind of are located in both kinds of places, and they're popping up. They're relatively new. And we were in one that was just fantastic, Valkyrie Brewery in a small town. And we walked in, and you could there was only about a dozen people in there, but they all knew each other. And as people would come in, they would just squeeze in around a table. So they had this little table, and everybody was sitting around. They'd just squeeze more chairs in, and we come in right away. Somebody reaches out, wanted to, give me advice on what beer to order, which ones that were really good and everything. You walk in, and you feel like you're part of a family almost
Yeah.
because that's what that place is. It's a social gathering place for people who live in that area. And that is a classic kind of third place. Um, Another brewery we went to that was kind of on the other extreme was a bigger and much more successful one. They serve a lot of food. They had and they were a much bigger place. But we came in, and there was the typical stand where you wait to be seated, and then we were taken to a chair. So you're not interacting with other customers. You're taken to your own table, and then you order food and some beers and things. But there was people were just spread out, and you could tell it was a destination place. And even though their description in many ways is the same, if you look on Google Maps or something and you're looking for places, they're just described the same way. They had a very different feel and very different social function.
Hmm.
And that's essentially what a third place has, a certain kind of social function. They bring people together, and they're gathering places for friends, but they're also places where you get to meet new people and enlarge your circle of acquaintance.
Hmm.
And that's not true. Like in most restaurants, that's
Yeah.
not what you do. You interact with the staff, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And so um, even though we often call cafes or even coffee shops third places, like
Yeah.
most coffee shops aren't,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, but you
Yeah.
know which ones are. You go into
Right.
those and you can tell, okay,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have this working theory about when I try and write essays about theater or think about theater that we're living in a time of what I'm calling like a crisis of seeing, that we're unable to see the full humanity of one another.
Mm.
And I've struggled to articulate it. But I find that in the work, in the creative work of the artwork of putting on plays, theater is a way of seeing. You're putting on something and it's a mirror. And my argument is as a medium, you're live. It's a little bit different than passive entertainment because you're asking an audience to sort of engage and hold their attention for a long time. But one of the things I was struck with in your book was how you articulated how the structures of cities from the Industrial Revolution to now, and societies and technology has shaped how we orient to each other, and arguably, therefore, how we see each other, or our
Yeah.
inability to see each other. Um, and I just was really taken with how well it was laid out and how clear it was. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that. I mean, that's a big question, I guess. But if you can speak to the structure getting in the way of third spaces now.
Yeah, so part of it is like what I think we've all experienced and we know about is the way in which neighborhoods aren't really gathering in interactive spaces in the same way as they were, especially prior to World War II, when houses were designed mostly with front porches and that was the entrance, and now they're mostly designed, they're not designed with a public face and to have the front door was used to be kind of a permeable barrier.
Hmm.
And like when people would move in and out, and the front face porch was that in between space, right?
Yeah,
And most houses now that are built that are detached houses have a garage that you pull right into the garage with your remote opener. And so you don't even interact with your next door neighbor necessarily, right?
right, right.
Because you're not out and interacting, and we're designing our cities more and more so that they're suitable for automobile transportation, not for walking. And I told the story of driving to a new a town that I hadn't been to for quite a while, and how much new development there was on the outskirts of it, um, and all the way from kind of entering the outskirts into the center of the town. I didn't see a single person outdoors. I didn't see any. You couldn't witness any social interaction, and it just occurred to me real forcefully that, well, it's not built for that.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got all the way into the middle of the town that there was a park there that had a ball field and a playground, and there was a ball game that was going on. So there's a few family members watching this ball game with kids, and there was a couple of people at the playground. But that was the only place in this town, of I would say about 15,000 people.
Uh,
Right. There's like
yeah,
that was the only place of social interaction. And it occurred to me that park was built in the 1930s.
yeah,
Right. And we used to build for the interaction,
right.
and now we don't. And as a result, yeah, we don't see each other.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about technology in that way? You're gonna have to remind me, but I loved the etymology of words in the book, and I really loved the moment about idiot.
Oh, yeah.
That the Greek idea that if I'm remembering correctly, the idiot is the non-public person. It's the person who stays away from being in the public interacting, because I felt like it
Yeah.
was a wonderful indictment of us.
Yeah. So
And
yeah,
yeah.
idios is I mean literally meant private.
Mm,
And so, and idiosyncratic means, like you have an idiosyncratic idea. It's an idea that is all by itself. It's not like any of the other things. It stands apart, right? And
yeah.
so literally the term idiot in the English language actually comes from somebody who stands apart, is outside of public life. And
Mm,
and the Greeks thought that wasn't really human life. Like we really are social animals. And if and the only the beasts and gods don't need others. Human
Hmm.
beings need others in order to live well, in order to flourish. And so this was a really strong sense among the Greeks. And of course, the very idea of democracy comes out of, like, could there be a government that comes out of really robust social interaction?
Yeah.
And I'm really worried about this in our country, like if that the technology is destroying our democracy because it makes us less interdependent on one another. And as it does that, like we no longer have the kind of social connections that make democracy possible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. The example in your book of it was two political parties maybe in a city council meeting, and and it wasn't until someone brought coffee and donuts that they started to mingle. And what I love about, I guess to me that's an example of what I'm in my own mind and work trying to get at in terms of framing for the public the value of social interaction, that it's not just a it's not devoid of the politics. It's actually connected. Like you have to see each other sort of as fully human. You have to interact so that you can get to a better politic. And the paradox to me is that if you don't see it, you don't see it, you know? Like if you're factionalized.
Well, yes, and if one of the things when we live a life really fully immersed in technology, that which its aim is to make our lives frictionless,
Right,
right?
right.
Then when we encounter other people, it's usually a friction. They
Right.
how we see them as obstacles, and we
Yeah.
tend to get annoyed with them because we've got some goal that we want to something we want to do, and this other person's in the way, and we have to stop, go around them. They're interfering, they're in our way on the highway. Um, they're in our way on the sidewalks. I've been saying that it really bugs me, even like since the pandemic. I notice that walking around my neighborhood, if I'm on the same side as somebody else, they'll tend to cross the street, so they don't have to make eye contact or something or say
Yeah.
hi. Like it's
Yeah.
it's it's weird. Like we really are socially avoidant now,
Yeah.
and it's becoming habit. But I think it's a result of gradually coming to see people more as obstacles. And then people come to be seen more as threats than as, like seeing other people as potential friends.
Right.
This is another opportunity to fulfill myself as a human being, to have a better life whenever I get to talk to somebody, right?
Yeah. 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 Can you talk a little bit about so in the book if I'm remembering, a chapter on friendship. Um
Mhm.
and also you talk a lot about conversation and turning. Um
Oh, right. Yeah. 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 The word conversation has a really interesting history because it comes from the Latin two words convertere, which means literally to turn together.
hmm,
And so there was this phrase in Latin, conversatio, which meant it it implied talking to other people, but it really meant something like a way of life in which we are oriented towards one another. So
yeah.
when any people are interacting in some way, that would be a form of conversatio.
Hmm,
And and so Vermeer's paintings, like are conversatio. If you remember there's some because they're domestic scenes, but they're domestic scenes oftentimes with social interaction. So they're portraying a certain way of life. Even if you remember the painting of there's a woman who is pregnant with a letter, and
hmm,
the window, the light is shining on her. Um, she is in conversation with the person who wrote the letter.
hmm,
And presumably say her husband who's off at the war or something, and like you speculate on that, but even that, even though she's depicted alone, she's in conversatio. It's a domestic scene describing a way of life. And in the art world, what we get from that is the idea of a conversation piece,
yeah.
which today it kind of means you have something in your house that people want to talk about. but a conversation piece originally meant a work of art that depicts conversation, that depicts some kind of social interaction.
Oh, wow.
And so, and then I think this would apply to theater as well, like
Yeah.
like a theater scene that depicts people engaged in some kind of social interaction would be a conversation piece, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, how have you, I mean, in your work with this, so maybe one more thing to talk about with the book. The core value of our theater company is a Zulu proverb from South Africa called Ubuntu, which is means I am because we are, or my humanity is tied
Mhm.
to yours. And often when I'll share that with people, as you know, people love it. People recognize it as sort of true. And
Yeah.
and at the end of your book, and throughout, but you talk about how I forget exactly how you put it, but I was really struck by the beauty of it that we're partial creatures, or we have
Mhm.
and then we actually need relationship to be whole. And I often find that as someone who like has studied way too much in theater, done way too much, I don't actually most of the time want to go. I don't want to go to it. But when I do go and I find it nourishing, my experience is that I needed it. Like it wasn't like, oh, I got something that I wanted to consume. It was that I was fed something that I needed. And throughout the book, you sort of talk about this, that it's a human need, like as you've mentioned, to be a social animal, to be in relationship one another, to interact, and how the interaction actually shapes us. Um,
Mhm.
and I guess maybe I'm not sure what the question is, but maybe if you can just speak to sort of that
Yeah.
but yeah,
So let me go back to this. I'm not sure I stated this in the book, but that the very idea of a need is something um, that without which we cannot satisfy some good.
hmm,
And so if you think of like there's human life as a good or a certain form of human life as a good, social interaction is a need. It's necessary for our lives to be good, right?
yeah,
And but it's not like like the need for food or water. The more we go without them, the more we desire them, and we develop. It actually develops a sort of pain. But there are some needs that the more we go without them, the more ephemeral they seem. They like we don't recognize that we have the need, and this is what happens with the lack of social connection. In fact, the more we lack social connection, the more likely we are to develop social anxiety, which makes us avoid the very thing that we need to be whole again.
right,
Right. And I think there's a number of things like this. I think the need for beauty in our lives is like
mhm,
that. Like the more we go without it, the more we become accustomed to ugliness and to the void, right?
yeah,
And we come to think that yeah, there's nothing missing in my life, and yet then you spend more time in the presence of beauty, and you feel more fulfilled, you feel more alive, and you realize, oh, I really did need this. It's
yeah,
making me better
yeah,
and interacting that, and that's why one of the things, and I wish I could go back and rewrite it and make it more explicit. I was trying to say something that I'm not sure really comes across, and that is that um, I can't tell you how to find your third place if you are just looking for a checklist of places to go.
right, right,
You have finding your third place is about changing your life. And what it means is you have to make a commitment to social connection. And you do this by joining groups
yeah,
and by like taking your calendar and looking out, and you just make appointments and you say, I'm going here and I'm going here and I'm going here, not because I happen to feel like it at the time. And and right now our lives have become so socially impoverished that if I just say, okay, I'm going to wait till the weekend and see how I'm feeling. Um, uh, you are probably not going to have as much social interaction as you should because we've become so accustomed to being alone and to being isolated, and the social disconnection has become comfortable for us.
Yeah. Yeah, at one point in the book, you talk about a woman who's able to sort of overachieve, and she's burning the
Mm.
candle at both ends, but has a lot of wax. And then the chapter goes on, and it concludes with like, we need more wax, which is the social interaction. Um,
Yeah,
and then somewhere I think in there you also talk about burnout. And what's interesting is I feel like a lot of times people will join a group, like a board, and I think you used
yeah,
this example, and then it ends up being emails and all the things that actually are not soul filling or not human interaction. And in the book, you talk about how you actually had to parse it out. You had to actually be like, what am I spending my time on? Can you talk a little bit about that? And
yeah. This is a time when I experienced burnout, and it was actually because I finally realized I was overcommitted to the wrong things and undercommitted to other things that I needed to be doing. And and the very idea of work-life balance wants to us to contrast life and work, which makes us think, oh, I'm doing too much work. I just need to spend more time alone at home. And that's oftentimes the worst thing, and it makes burnout worse. And I figured this out by kind of playing around with diagramming how I was spending my time. And I did it, I made a Venn diagram of, three overlapping circles with personal life, work life, and social life, and realized that, and then just wrote down all the activities I was doing with a plus next to the activity if it gave me energy
Mm,
after I did it, a minus next to it if it robbed me of energy. And I realized that I was doing, especially my work and social life, I was doing mostly things that were robbing me of energy.
mm,
And that the few things that I was doing that gave me energy, I wasn't doing nearly enough of. I wasn't spending as much time on those. And so I had to, yeah, I resigned from a couple of boards where that had me doing a lot of emails and meetings and organizing things, which was basically a lot of my job, at work that was also stealing energy.
yeah,
Um, but I committed myself to doing more teaching, which I felt like gave me energy, but I was doing less of it because those other parts of my job had grown. And I had also pretty much quit writing because I felt like I just didn't have time to do it. But that's something that I find that it's kind of like exercise. It's hard, and yet I feel really energized when I do it. And that's true of most creative activities that we
yeah,
do, right? You do
yeah,
something creative, and it can be hard work and it takes a lot of energy, but then you get done and you just feel great, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then you want to do more of other things as a
yeah,
result. So that's I was kind of looking for that, and it was like the both I would say the creative activity and the social interaction that were the two things that I found gave me more energy, even though they required a commitment, and I wasn't doing nearly enough of them. And then since then, I've kind of done some research on this, and it turns out this is just generally true for human beings.
hmm
Those are the things that make us feel fulfilled as human beings. It's relationships and creativity.
There's this Howard Thurman quote, who was a theological instructor, and I think he taught Martin Luther King, and he has this quote that's something like, don't ask how to change the world, ask what makes me feel most alive, what makes
I
you feel
love
most
that.
alive, and
Yeah,
go do that because the world needs people who are most alive. And I love that.
yeah. That is
Because yeah,
that's spot on. Yes, yeah, that's great.
yeah. And kind of in line with what you're saying, in the book you talk a little about this, and I think about this all the time because theater is situated in the strange in between entertainment and art, and I distinguish the two a little bit. And
Mhm.
it's hard to talk about because as a culture, in my opinion, we're so inundated with entertainment on the screen. We're really well versed in that. Like we kind of politics almost has become an entertainment. Amusing Ourselves to Death is a book I love, sort of about the mediums of things, and you talk about the passivity of entertainment versus the engagement of participation. Um, can you speak a little bit to that? Because I think that for a lot of us, I guess personally, I remember as a young person, my dad watched a lot of TV, and I remember just being like, I want to have a life where I watch less, you know, like
Yes.
I want to have a life where I'm like engaged and reading, and I didn't even know what I wanted to be reading. I just wanted to feel like I had enough that I was doing that gave me that extra energy to keep doing it. And it is a paradox because it's a putting in a fair amount of energy, but then you actually can get something out of it versus, I also have moments where I'm like, let me just turn off my brain. I need,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
but can you speak a little bit about that dichotomy of entertainment versus engagement and contribution?
Yeah. And if I recall rightly, I think like there's a part of the book where I talk about how when especially electronic forms of entertainment, what happened is it became possible to entertain a lot of people simultaneously, but without their interaction at all.
Yeah,
And so then you end up um, like the so the movie theater is modeled after the old style theater, right? In
right,
rows, except without the big lobbies where there's the social interaction before
right.
others, without the intermissions and things like that, right? But it's in the dark and it's all facing forward,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very different than when you're face to face. And you see this in when you're in like I love going into like little bars and so forth where they have there's music but you're sitting around tables and you're kind of interactive and it's loud, but you've got some music and there's entertainment, but you're not all facing the same direction.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
social interaction with the entertainment, right? And as opposed to a lot of, modern concerts where it's just dark and you're in an assigned seat. You
yeah.
have your ticket and you get like that's a seat that you have to go to and you just sit down and went to a Bob Dylan concert recently. And I haven't been to a large concert for a long time. I have
Yeah,
a couple places I like to go that are small that seat no more than 100 people. I love those places.
yeah.
I have to tell you, I hated it. I
Oh,
hate it just like yeah, like
yeah,
sitting down, it's super loud, you can't talk to anybody and there's no social interaction there. And okay, it's the music actually sounds better uh at home than it does in the concert hall because the
yeah,
acoustics weren't very good. And
yeah, yeah.
but this is just like it was spectacle.
Right.
And spectacle isn't like it's not rewarding, it's not fulfilling.
Hmm.
Um and that's so this is why like I love small theaters,
Yeah.
and you get and the other thing there's a very different feel when you are you feel like you're a part of an event when you're going to live theater
Hmm.
that you don't when I go to a movie, I've just seen a movie,
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
It's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
just went to our university um, has a music theater program, and they just put on Little Women the musical
Hmm.
over the weekend. And I was there, and I just like I saw all kinds of people in the community, and
Yeah.
interacted
Yeah.
with them, and it was an event, right? It
Oh,
was
yeah. Oh, yeah.
right,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. It costs the people up. There's fear and nerves and you're holding space. And you know the thing I think about a lot is in a film, the film exists whether or not the audience is there, you know, but
Yeah.
the event is actually the audience attending. And you talk about that too, like the practice of attending to one another. And I think a lot about today how attention has been extracted from the act of attending. Like it's become a kind of disembodied a disembodied thing. And then along with all of that, I think
By the way, I love that that your observation that like attention has become disembodied from attending. Yeah, I think you're
yeah.
right about that. I'd never put that together. That's really great.
And somewhere in there too is sort of the habit of consuming versus like
Mhm.
engagement, you know, like we're engaged. I there's this book that's kind of similar to your book, kind of stayed with me, and it's a book called Habits of the Heart. Do you know this
Oh
book?
yeah. Is
Um,
that Bella?
yeah,
Bella? Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And what I loved about that book, which I feel like your book and this work around third spaces is in conversation with, is that book for some reason was a book I read where I was like, oh my gosh, like we've become so individualistic that the whole way that we're seeing the world is through the individual. Like we no longer have a consciousness around community because we're not engaged in real community. And in that book, he talks a lot about de Tocqueville, like you do in your book about associations. And I would argue maybe his thesis of the book is sort of what happens when the church as an institution, not as a religious place of worship in the religious sense, but as a community forming enterprise, sort of is no longer central. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that as maybe just like the church as a social function, because it feels like that was such a big third space, like third
It
pillar.
was. Yeah, no, the church as an institution was the most powerful force for building social capital in the United States for a long
Yeah,
time, because so many people belonged and they went regularly and they met people and they greatly expand their circle of acquaintance and then would spend regular time with them.
right.
It takes about 200 hours of spending time with somebody to consider them to be a good friend.
Wow. Wow.
Well, and what we found is that like in 1990, about a third of Americans had 10 or more good friends, close friends. Today, it's around 12%. Like, and a lot of that is due to the loss of churches that like so many people don't have any group of people that they belong to that they commit to interacting with on a regular basis. And I've received some criticism for not talking enough about churches as third places, but like they don't really, they don't, they are third places for some, but for most people now, they're not like they were. There's not programs going on like all day long on Sunday. There's not programs every, say, Wednesday night and at different nights through the week. They used to be real community gathering places. And there's still a few that are, but most are not. Most are not third places anymore. And that's too bad because it's I agree with Bella about it being it's bad for our country.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
because it's just decreased our level of social connection, and social connection is really important, not just for individuals, but for communities.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean it's funny because it took me a long time to articulate this to myself, but I realized I think what I'm trying to do with theater is create a secular church
Yeah.
that not in the religious sense, though there is a correlation, I guess, in humanism between like maybe plays you're seeing and something in the pulpit, but really just in the social sense. Like something I also love that I forgot to mention in the book is how you talk about social capital. Um,
Mhm.
because I one of the things I loved about the idea of a third space is that it's a neutral place where status sort of social status collapses or is reduced, so people can meet each other as equals. And what I also love is that I sometimes feel like as a society we undervalue how interaction can turn into social capital and how powerful social capital is um, just in life. Like if someone comes from a low income background, social capital to me, I come from a low income background. Social
Yeah,
capital has been like the ladder. I mean, it becomes like relationships and
absolutely.
who you
Yep.
know and if you don't meet them, like if there's no space where you're really meeting each other in a meaningful relational way, I don't know how that's built. Um, and could you talk a little bit about social capital as a means for I guess society maybe is the way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. So, and the idea of social capital has been around a long time, but was really popularized by Robert Putnam in when he wrote Bowling Alone, which came out in I think 1999 or 2000, right around the turn of the century. And he talked about it as it's really a form of like generalized trust in communities is what social capital is, and it uh, it makes everything that we try to do politically in our society, it makes it come out much better because instead of just like operating formally through like certain kinds of uh, legal mechanisms and formal institutions, we handle a lot of problems just informally through our natural day-to-day interactions. And so it turns out like states that are really high in social capital, which means that you have a lot of people that know their neighbors, that volunteer, that vote, that do all do all these social things. States really high in that kind of social interaction, um, they have much better educational outcomes. They have lower crime. They have less domestic violence. Like all of the things that we are trying to accomplish as a society that we keep, and we fight over these things politically. Like Democrats and Republicans are always fighting over like, what should we do about our schools? What should we do about healthcare? And it turns out like if you have really high social capital, you have improvements in healthcare and education and
Yeah,
all these
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Um, so social capital is really important. Putnam also points out that if you don't belong to anything, joining one club reduces your chance of dying in the next year by 50%.
Oh my God. That is unbelievable. That is unbelievable. Somehow I
Yeah.
missed that in your book.
Well, I think I came across it after I wrote the book. So
Oh,
I've been using it. I've been giving a lot of talks, so I always mention
yeah.
that.
Wow.
Also, something I don't think I had this in my book either. Maybe I did, but the a recent study of dementia all over the world, finding that robust social networks, those who have those robust networks, have a 30 to 50% lower risk of dementia.
Oh my God. Wow.
So, like, we're finding more and more like really hard evidence of how important those social connections are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the social capital, you talk about bridging and bonding capital. Can you share? I mean, what I love about that, I mean, our whole mission with our theater company is to bridge social divides. But it is absolutely true that like it takes real bonds in order to keep venturing out to try and do that. My partner, he and I know each other. He and I went to middle school together, high school together, college together. We started this theater company together. Um, and and that being sort of and then the third founder I went to grad school with, and from there it's there's been a sort of bridging community. But can you talk about that, like the bonding and
Yeah.
versus the bridging?
Yeah. So bonding capital is oftentimes just what we mean by interpersonal relationships, friendships. That's bonding capital. You can think about like two bricks and the mortar that connects them, that's that bonding capital connects them together. Um, Bridging capital is what spans the distance between disparate groups of people. And so there's a lot of organizations that help us develop bridging capital because they unite different groups of people that would ordinarily not interact. So
Mhm.
wherever you have places with a lot of diversity of diverse groups interacting in meaningful ways to get things done.
Mhm.
Bridging capital is usually some kind of formal collaboration on
Got it.
projects. Um, but here's what's so interesting. What we find is that you really need a great deal of bonding capital within communities. You need a lot of like basic social interaction where people get to know and like one another and interact in order for bridging capital really to flourish.
Yeah.
Because what happens otherwise is you want to do things like, say, you want to collaborate on different projects, but there's so much distrust, so much misunderstanding and suspicion that people aren't willing to extend themselves to
Mhm.
really collaborate.
Yeah.
And so like we find that sometimes with school boards. Well, school boards are places that really depend on bridging capital, like to come together to say, okay, we got people with all these different interests, but how are we going to unite and address this at the school level? For example, if we need a new building or an extension or curriculum change, something like that. Well, in communities where people know one another and interact quite a bit, that becomes pretty easy on those
Yeah.
school boards. And you get a lot of uniformity, and then a referendum comes along and people pass it and so forth. In places where people don't socially interact much and don't know one another, and they haven't developed the interpersonal relationships, um, you get a lot of suspicion and people won't collaborate. In fact, they work actively to undermine each other's proposals,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
So and I find this like so you have to invest in both. You have to work when you work in social, try to promote social capital in a community. You want to say, okay, we need places for bonding, and then we need like places and opportunities for the bridging, working on the bridging capital.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need both. And I find that um, sometimes, and I find this especially upon people who are quite progressively minded. They want
Mhm.
to jump right to the bridging capital,
Right. Right.
right?
Right. Yeah. Oh,
And they
yeah.
have no patience for the, oh, you're just a group of friends hanging out. Like, why don't you get to work and do something meaningful? And
Yeah.
like you have to have these intermediate steps. And so I'll give you examples. So like when you have a meeting of people and you're getting them together to do something and you're talking about something that you know is going to be controversial and you need to get everybody on the same page, um, you better make sure that the people in the room know one another
Yeah.
and you better spend some time on the relationship building. That's the bonding capital part.
Yeah.
And if you're in a community where people already know one another really well, you can just jump right to the work, right?
Right. Right.
But if you're not, if you're bringing in a group of strangers, um, um, spend time on the relationship building and take more time and take time to let them get to know one another on an interpersonal basis first.
Yeah.
That's the bonding work that comes before the bridging.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like the erosion of trust in contemporary life accounts for so much of the backwardness that and my experience with trust is it can take a lot of time. And I don't know if that's always true, but I have people now I've worked with for 10 years, and I'm cognizant that not that it's taken all 10 years, but it's precious. Like it takes that time. I something else that came up for me that I think a lot about somewhere in the book you talk about how this thing that used to be necessary, like we used to have to I don't know, all go to the same place to get our food and interact, that necessity, which facilitated social interaction to some degree, has now become an option. Like we can just have food delivered to us. And so I think somewhere you say something to the effect of the great challenge of our time is making sure that technology does not sort of take us away from these things that are necessary in terms of social interaction. I was listening to this Ezra Klein talk, and Derek Thompson, his guest, quoted someone else saying about technology that we can adopt the values of the technology. And so with AI or other things or like television, we sort of adopt the value that humans were meant to sit for 3+ hours a day and just sit and be supine and watch TV instead of making the technology, come to our values. And I'm really struck by, I guess, or maybe you can speak to how you think we make this better, now that we've got to choose something that we need and instead of
Yeah.
coming to it instinctually.
Yeah, I mean, that is really hard. We, hmm. Yeah, I see. I do think that is a great challenge of our time, and I really don't know if we're going to be able to rise to it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because yeah, we were in the past we were forced into social interaction whether we wanted it or not. You had to go to the grocery store and get your groceries.
yeah,
You had to go to the post office, and to mail packages and get stamps, do letters, and not, most people don't even mail letters and if you want to mail somebody a gift, well, you just click a button on Amazon and
right.
have Amazon send it with a card that they print, that sort of like you- like all these and it just like one after another, all these modes of social interaction that we used to have to do, now we have to seek them out.
Yeah,
And will we? And that's the question. Will we do it? Because if we don't do it, like our lives are going to be worse. Well, we're
yeah,
going to be at much higher risk of dementia, for
yeah,
example. Our cardiovascular health is going to be worse. We're not going to be as happy. And then as a society, we're going to be more suspicious, less willing to collaborate. We're going to be more polarized politically. We
yeah,
see all these things happening. Um, at the same time, when I, I teach young people at a college, I think there's a real awareness in their lives that their screen time has been harmful to them, and they want to know how do they avoid it? How like not how do they completely avoid it, but how do they manage their lives in such a way that they're not negatively affected
right,
by the
right,
digital media, um, and And so, as there's a growing awareness of this, um, can we can we purposefully adopt the proper habits that kind of move us into increased deliberate social
yeah,
interaction?
yeah,
But that's the thing. It has to be deliberate, and it never had to be before. And I really don't know are there ways? I'd say I don't know if societies have done this. I'd like to talk to anthropologists and find out, like, are there models where, a society that like really didn't have to do something, like adopted and, deliberately, generally were compelled into certain
right,
habits, right?
right, right. Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
can we choose habits of social interaction?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the key.
I think about it with our democracy too. We have a very diverse company, and I often think that like the question of the American theater is sort of the question of American democracy, which is like how do all these people from different backgrounds work together? Like how do you build that trust? How do you build that social capital? How do you give adequate representation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And it's wonderful. I mean, it's a wonderful challenge, but boy, I mean, it's a real, it's I mean, it's a real crisis and challenge. Maybe the last question, earlier you mentioned, what you sort of maybe you'd wish made more explicit in the book was that you can't just sort of do the checklist. To seek out a third space, you really have to change your life. Can you speak a little bit to how either you did it or how you've seen other people make that deliberate choice, and what happens for them to kind of make the decision like, hey, I gotta I gotta get out there. I gotta find something that I know I need but can't quite put my finger on or name.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was joining some organizations and then really making um, a, a commitment to become very involved in a couple of them. One is Rotary, and we're like, um, and I'm a big fan of service clubs that bring people together in communities. In my town, we happen to have a very large and very active Rotary Club that is multi-generational. Most of the people that are joining now are fairly young, and so it's really great. That's not the case with all Rotary clubs in the country. So I would say we have greater diversity of membership than a lot of typical
Yeah.
Rotary clubs. But I like a service organization because it gives you lots of opportunities for volunteering, but
Hmm.
it means that at least 1 hour a week, I'm committed to going and interacting with this group of people, and it's on my
Yeah.
calendar.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I did is a number of years ago, I invited a couple of friends to meet me every Wednesday morning at 7 o'clock for coffee. And we've
Yeah.
been doing it for like, I don't know, 12 years or something now. And the group has grown. Like it started out with three of us, now we're up to seven. And like they're like, and I find all over like people really desire something like that. And they tell me that they're looking for a group to join and they can't find one. And I
Yeah.
tell them like, well, just invite two people that you know to like meet you, like because the world is full of lonely people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so like if you extend an invitation but the key thing is making a regular commitment. So it's on your calendar, you do it regularly. There are people that absolutely want that and and it will just make you happier, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but there are days, like Wednesday morning rolls around and I've got all this stuff that I've got to do at work and I'm tired. I'd rather sleep in
All right.
or go right into work, and I think, oh, like we've got, um, but it's a commitment. This is the thing.
Mm.
And so this is the main thing I've done. I've made a number of different commitments,
Mm.
that I complain about at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I get it.
I know they nourish me, and that's what it takes
Yeah.
is especially say I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
And when I have too much social interaction, I need to go off by myself for a couple hours to recover.
Yeah.
Like but I still like know that I'm not happy when I just spend a lot of time alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so that is the thing. It's like recognize that like I think especially if you're an introvert, you need to schedule your social interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Rick, thank you so much for joining. This was really wonderful, and yeah, I found your book so illuminating and edifying and inspiring and just encouraging. I run this theater, and sometimes it can feel a little small or like, what am I doing in the big scheme of all this? And reading your book, I kind of felt like, okay, well, I feel
No,
firm.
that's where it is because the small place, that's where you get that's where you develop the meaningful relationships over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what you want in your life.